Hey, what's going on guys, it's Yui, and today we're going over the top 10 best incantations in Elden Ring. I actually have already made this video about 5 months ago, but that video sucked ass, so we're going to do it again because my opinions have changed. As for this video though, we're going to talk about just the offensive spells. I don't want to talk about the support spells or any buffs, because those are boring. I just want to talk about the fun stuff. Anyway, this is the build of which I used throughout the majority of the gameplay. As always, please do like and subscribe, and yeah, let's just get into it. Starting off the list at number 10, we have Scouring Black Flame. Now, this is a medium-range Black Flame projectile attack that does get a nice horizontal spread, so it's good at hitting multiple enemies and enemies that do like to dodge. Now, the worst thing about this spell is definitely its hit detection issues. When you try to fight enemies that are smaller than you, or when you're on an inclined angle, trying to hit with this thing is borderline impossible. But obviously, this spell does get that Black Flame percentile damage over time effect, which is very similar damage to the other types of Black Flame incantations, but the reason as to why I prefer this one the most is because it does get that nice horizontal spread, as I said, and it just hits twice sometimes. I don't really know what the criteria is for it, but sometimes it just hits an enemy multiple times, and I'm no mathematician, but if you hit an enemy multiple times, it's doing about twice as much damage, and it has nothing to do with how large the enemy actually is, because even against like smaller enemies and NPCs, it just hits them twice. Don't really know what's going on there. Now, the reason I'm not going to put this higher on the list is because it's very hard to pull off consistently, because it is kind of just random sometimes. I think it's a distance thing. You have to be at a certain spot. But yeah, it's still a really good spell if you manage to get that multiple hit. But even without it, it's still really good. Now, normally I wouldn't really put a glitched-based spell on a list, but honestly, it's been around for a while, and From Software is just not going to fix it, so it might as well just be a feature at this point. Number 9, we have Frenzied Burst. This is probably the best sniping spell in the entire game. You can sit at the back of the map, fully charge it, just cross-map things. It travels incredibly quickly. It might as well just be hit scan for how fast that it actually does travel. But yeah, you can pretty much kill things before they even reach you, because it actually does decent damage as well. But the fact that it is a sniper means that it's probably a little bit more situational. You can't really use it in every single circumstance like you can with other projectiles. And for 24 FP, there are other ones that can probably do more damage for its FP consumption. But with how far that this thing travels, how quickly it does travel as well, it definitely is something that you should always have equipped. Number 8, we have Frozen Lightning Spear. Now, this is an AoE that does lightning damage and frost buildup as well. Now, being that it is an incantation, it's pretty much going to be your only way to actually proc frost with a pure faith build, which is incredibly underrated because frost is one of the best status effects in the entire game, because you can just debuff enemies to make them take 20% more damage, which is incredibly handy. Now, this spell actually does still do decent damage on top of that. It has a 2-part animation. You can slam the lightning onto the ground, and it has that cool follow-up attack. Now, that follow-up lightning storm attack does actually have 2 parts. So against larger types of enemies and bosses, if it hits them multiple times, it'll be doing a lot more damage. Now, there are a couple things about this spell which I don't really care about. 29 FP is not the most cheapest thing in the entire world, but it is still doable. And the hit detection as well. When you actually hit something that's directly in front of you, sometimes a lightning storm attack just doesn't actually hit. And trying to aim with this thing in like 180 turn doesn't actually work as well. You have to like be aiming in that direction to actually use it, which is slightly annoying. Hence why I don't really put it higher on this list, but it still is a very solid spell and a good way of proccing frost. Number 7, we have GREYOLL'S Roar. Now, this spell consumes 50 FP, takes up 2 slots, has a 28 faith requirement and a 17 arcane requirement, and doesn't really do that great a damage, and it has a very long animation. So why would I put it on this list? And it's because that it does debuff enemies really well. Basically, as soon as you hit them with this spell, they take 10% more damage, and they deal 15% less damage. So not only are you doing more damage, they're just going to be doing less damage to you, which obviously is really handy. And this can be used against any enemies, and being that it's a debuff, it's actually going to stack with all the buffs that you have. So I don't have to worry about things like Flame Growing Strength and Golden Vow. It's just going to work together. And being that the animation itself does come out relatively quickly, it actually is a good spell to actually clean up kills, because the damage isn't really too bad. So if you actually have a boss that's almost killed, I just would use GREYOLL'S Roar to just finish him off, because it is still like nice range and it works that way. But yeah, the best way to do it is just lead off the fight with it. It debuffs them for an entire minute. You just end up doing more damage, switch to your other dragon incantations, and end up getting the kill that way. Number 6, we have Lightning Spear. Now, this is just a very easy to use, noob friendly, just throw it on and you'll succeed type of spell, because it's incredibly cheap, has nice range, very quick cast. It does lightning damage, which is amazing because obviously lightning damage is good against a bunch of enemies in the game, and there's not many that actually resist to lightning. But out of all the projectiles in this game, this one probably actually has the quickest casting animation, and you can fully charge it as well. Yeah, so like it just has a bunch of pros going for it, and you're just going to benefit every single time that you do use this spell. At number 5, we have both Dragonclaw and DRAGONMAW. Now, both of these spells work very similar in that they're dragon incantations that have short range but do a lot of damage, pure physical damage, and they actually do some nice poise damage on top of that. Now, I did do an entire playthrough using both of these spells to try and figure out which one I actually did prefer, and honestly, I still don't even know. They both have very specific uses. DRAGONMAW might actually end up having a bit more because it does have more range, and obviously it just has that one hit that just does very solid damage, whereas DRAGONCLAW, you only really start to benefit off it after you use the follow-up attack, and it is an AoE as well, so it actually is good at hitting multiple enemies at once, whereas DRAGONMAW, when you use it at point-blank range, sometimes it can just overshoot your target and just miss. So there was just certain types of bosses where you would just use one over the other. DRAGONCLAW, if you just didn't have much time to attack at all, you could just use the first part of the animation. If you had a little bit more time, then I'd use DRAGONMAW. But if you had a lot of time, then you could just use the DRAGONCLAW again because you have the follow-up attack. So I don't really know. It just depends on what you really want for certain situations. I'd probably just go with the DRAGONMAW for the safe pick, but both are still really good. Number 4, we have Flame Fall Upon Them. Now, this is probably the best projectile incantation in the entire game, and I don't think anybody can convince me otherwise, because for 16 FP, which is literally less than Lightning Spear, might I add, you will end up doing more damage, probably end up getting more range, and you have a nice horizontal spread, so it's good against hitting enemies that like to dodge and move around or hitting multiple enemies at once. And even if you hit with one of those little balls, it ends up doing maximum damage as well. But you can fully charge this spell, you can free aim it and throw it pretty far. And for 16 FP, you can't really go wrong in terms of the damage that it actually does do. Now, yes, it's not going to be as quick as a cast as Lightning Speed, but it still is relatively quick. And I probably do end up preferring lightning damage over fire damage, but fire damage is probably still your next best thing anyway. So yeah, overall, I just consider it to be the best projectile for the incantations. Number 3, I want to talk about all of the breath attacks. Now, the reason I want to talk about all of them is because they all work the exact same way. You want to use certain ones for certain situations. But the reason as to why they get number 3 is because they just do ridiculous damage, like really, really good damage. You can just sit at the back of the map and then spam these things because they have really good range as well and just shred everything in the game. Now, the ones I want to talk about specifically are the lesser versions, the ones that actually consume less FP, because the named-based dragon incantations, I don't really care for much because they consume 25% more FP, but only do 17% more damage. So your total overall damage is actually going to be better with the lesser versions. But if you have the mind and you're actually extremely high level, then you might as well use the named-based dragon ones. But another reason as to why I do like the lesser versions is because you can use those ones on horseback and you get a quicker casting animation. And with the other ones, you have to jump in the air and use them, which can be a benefit. But if you get hit, you fall straight to the ground and lose a whole bunch of stamina that way. Now, the only spell where I actually would use the dragon named version is for the lava-based spell, Theodorix's Magma, because that one actually just does more damage and consume more FP, so you might as well go with that one, because the damage that you can get with Theodorix's Magma is just out of this spell. Look at how it performs against Radagon. It just fucks him up completely. So because of this spell, I wouldn't really care much about the Fire Breath attack, because if you just want to go for regular total overall damage, you should use the magic-based one, because it just does more damage than the rest of them. But obviously, if you want to alternate in terms of using status effects, then obviously use Rotten Breath for Scarlet Rot, and then the Ice Breath for that Frost build-up. But yeah, if you use those 4 spells, you can just have a field day with every single boss in the entire game. At number 2, we have Catch Flame. Now, this is just the only spell you actually ever really need to use if you have a faith-based build, because it can just carry you from start to finish. You get it right at the beginning of the game, and it just works through every single facet because it's incredibly quick, does insane DPS, low requirements, cheap FP cost, low stamina. You pretty much get an entire moveset with this thing. You can spam jumping attacks, rolling attacks, and running attacks, and they all come out very, very fast. It just works incredibly well. Now, I guess the only downside you really could say about this thing is that it has poor range, but like with how quick it actually is, there's not much risk involved to begin with. And with how much DPS you actually do output, I don't think it can actually be overstated how much damage you can actually really do with this thing. So yeah, it's just worth it through and through. It should always have Catch Flame on if you do have a faith-based build. At number 1, we have Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike. Now, basically, how this spell actually works is for 36 FP, you pretty much just beat the entire game. Like, honestly, doesn't matter what they put in front of you, or even behind, left, right, doesn't matter where they are. You just use the spell, they just instantly die. That's how the spell actually works. Doesn't matter what the enemy is. Small, medium, large, it doesn't discriminate. Rated E for everyone. It fucks them all up equally. It's just that good. I don't think I even need to talk about it anymore. The rest of the gameplay is going to speak for itself. See ya.